Hey all, I'm back again. This is one on genetically modified foods. I mentioned in the last video that I was going to include information on genetically modified foodstuffs. So here it is. People ask a lot of times, they ask me, what are GMOs? What do they do? What's the deal with them? Should I worry about them? Should I not worry about them? How do they affect my health? What's happening with them? Genetically modified foods are actually a very simple thing to understand. Quite a few years ago, back in the mid to late 90s, several scientists started designing foods that would be able to grow faster. They would be able to grow faster, they would have a faster yield, and they would also be resistant. Since then, they've become resistant to different pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, and fungicides that might get into the soil. Now, what you have to understand is that these genetically modified foods, when they grow and they're self-terminating seeds, meaning they don't reseed. These seeds can't reutilize the same nutrition, they can't spread themselves out. So if you're a farmer, you have to buy these seeds every single year. Now, the crops will tend to grow very, very fast. However, they grow because of the genetic modification, not necessarily because the plant itself is utilizing nutrients from the soil very well. In fact, what the plant will tend to do is the plant will not be able to produce its own antioxidative effects, which means that if the plant is growing, it's not going to produce from the inside anything that will be a natural pesticide that will keep pests away. If you're taking something like an organic tomato and it's growing, an organic tomato is going to grow and it is going to produce from the inside out antioxidants and things like that that are going to keep the plant growing healthfully, and it is going to deter different animals and things like that. The plant is actually going to feed off of any animals that might be in the soil, and I discussed this in the last video, that there's a mycorrhizoforma, which looks like it looks like little fingers. It's when you pull a plant out of the soil and it has that kind of film, that filminess on the root structure. That's a rhizome, and the rhizosphere exists in the soil, inside of the soil, and so it's going to feed out, and they attach like little loops, and it will liquefy the organs of whatever the predator animal is. It might be earthworms or something like that, and it will suck up into the plant those organs and use that as fuel. It's pretty fascinating. There's a lot of research out there on it, but I suggest highly check out Paul Chek's information that he has on it. CHEK. He has a lecture series that he did at the Price Pottinger Foundation in San Diego from a few years ago, and I think it's a 4 or 5 part lecture, but you can see it here on YouTube, and it's definitely one to check out if you want more information about that, and especially about soil science and the difference between organic growing and other what is called conventional farming. So when we're talking about conventional farming, what we're talking about is the use of a lot of fertilizer, a lot of pesticides, and now what has become common with conventional farming is a lot of use of genetically modified foods. So what does a genetically modified plant do? And what exactly is it? A genetically modified plant is basically a plant, say you want your plant to grow really, really fast, like within a month or two, so that you can grow it really fast, you have a real quick turnaround, you can take a huge yield of crops in, and then you can dump them, you can turn them into wherever you're going to turn them into. You get your subsidies back from the government, and all of a sudden you've made your money back from the year. So now you're actually making money instead of having to wait for everything, to go through, because your crop yield is so much larger. Okay, that's the main incentive for farmers using genetically modified foodstuffs instead of growing their food organic. Okay, so now you're getting paid for growing those things. Sure. What is the genetically modified food, though? Why does it grow so quickly? The reason it grows so quickly is because it's not technically that plant. It has been spliced with other genes from other species, sometimes of plant, like they used to do in farming with animal husbandry or plant cross-pollination and things like that. Or sometimes it is crossed with animal sequencing. So we're talking Island of Dr. Moreau stuff. Okay, so say I wanted my plant to grow, in a month or something like that, and it normally takes 6 months or 7 months or something. I have to wait, practically most of the year for this crop to grow properly, in soil the way that it's supposed to. I want it to grow in a month. Well, I might do some research and find out, and this is, don't quote me on what I'm about to say because it's just an example, but I might, find out that baby squids, they grow into, if it's, a baby squid that's a giant squid, it might grow, really, really quickly in its first month of growth, like unbelievably quickly to most of its full length of size. So what I would do if I was a scientist that was going to genetically modify this food, I would go in and I would isolate the genes from inside of that squid, and I would take those genes for extreme growth, making it grow really, really fast in its first month of growth, and then I would splice it into the genetic sequence of the plant that I was trying to grow. So the plant wouldn't just be that plant. It would also be part giant squid. So effectively what they're doing, what a lot of genetically modified foods have been called, are frankenfoods, because they're not really that particular thing. It's a combination of one or two or several other genetic sequences, not necessarily from the plant world and not necessarily in an isolated fashion within one subset of a species or not. So no one really knows what goes into some of these particular plants, other than those who are genetically engineering them and modifying them and creating them to be a certain way. Now, pretty much all genetically modified foodstuffs, and whether we're talking about corn or soybeans or different types of beans mostly, and some are starting to get into wheat and barley, and even some, I've heard some experiments with rice that people are doing, but high yield crops is mostly what genetically modified foods are. These genetically modified foods, our bodies cannot utilize them because they don't recognize that particular food. Like, so say if you ate an ear of corn that was genetically modified, your body would recognize the corn sequencing coming in. It would recognize that there's those sugars from the corn coming in, but it would not recognize the sequences that are breaking it up and making it not the thing that it is. Your body would become very quickly confused by consuming it. So those peptides and those proteins that are going to break off and be different chain bonds that are going to move through your system and your body's going to utilize are not going to function properly for you. They're not going to be real. And it's going to make you very, very sick. Genetically modified foodstuffs have been found pretty much 100% of the time in independent research. And when I talk about independent research, I mean something that is not researched by the company making that genetically modified food. they've been found pretty much 100% of the time to cause cancer. In most all European countries, genetically modifying food is illegal because the number of deaths in lab animals and associated physiological metabolic problems that they cause are staggering. They're off the charts. If you took a bunch of mice and you fed them genetically modified, soybeans over and over and over again, the mice would get cancer, they would become infertile, and they would die. Now, there is no long-term study on what genetically modified foods do to humans because genetically modified foods are a newer technology. We haven't sat around making someone, and they would have to be extremely brave, just eat genetically modified foods for years on end and see what effect that has on them. However, what we can do is we can look at the majority of the population in places like America that have a huge overabundance of genetically modified foodstuffs in the diet. And what we can see is that health deteriorates extremely rapidly. American health is on some of the lowest level it's ever been. Obesity is on one of the highest levels it's ever been. Cancer rates are continuing to rise, higher and higher and higher. And fertility levels are going down the tubes, just completely plummeting. So the food is killing you. It's killing the soil because genetically modified foods are predator seeds and they seep up all of the nutrition from the soil and destroy the topsoil, especially when combined with the pesticides that they are designed to be resistant against. And they have to be sprayed with a ton of pesticides because they aren't producing those antioxidants, right? So if you took a university study of different things like a genetically modified food stuff, especially if it's from a university that is, gets a lot of kickbacks from these particular companies that may or may not create these genetically modified foodstuffs. If you look at nutrient profiles between a genetically modified food and an organic food, they may or may not look the same. The vitamin and mineral content and things like that, and different levels of what the things have may look the same. So someone may say in a clinical trial, oh look, or in a clinical setting, rather, a laboratory setting, look, these two things have the same elements, minerals, and things like that. There's no difference between a genetically modified food and an organic food. There's no difference whatsoever. The difference is in quality, okay? In quality and in utilization. So if you are getting a bunch of minerals and vitamins that your body cannot utilize and you can't use them, then they're being excreted in waste. Your body is eliminating them. You're either urinating them or you're defecating them, or they are storing in your fat cells. And it's putting a huge load on your liver because your body can't utilize it. Whereas something that is organic, your body knows how to deal with something that comes from a healthy soil. In order for something to be called organic, it has to, at least right now, some of these major companies are trying to change these regulations and what the wording of organic actually means so they can sneak in some of these genetically modified foodstuffs. But right now, what being organic means is that it has to grow from soil that has not had any pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, fungicides, any of the poisons put in them that destroys the topsoil and destroys the nutrient qualities of the soil that naturally will go into the plant. Now, some people would say, well, it's crazy. There's so many different genetically modified foods out there. I have to eat genetically modified foods. I mean, what's the real difference anyway? The difference is that 100 years ago, every plant was organic. There wasn't any such thing as genetically modified foods. They didn't exist. You know, your great grandparents didn't have genetically modified foods. They had real foods. Now, if we look at how they looked back then, we might say, oh, they were just in shape and really hardy and really smart and really strong because, you know, they had to do so many physically demanding things. They had to do this. They had to do everything by hand, blah, 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 which to a certain extent is true, okay? But the main reason is because their food wasn't making them sick. You wouldn't be here if they hadn't have been healthy, okay? There weren't a billion pharmaceutical advantages that they had at the time, okay? So your food is making you sick because it's genetically modified. Your pharmaceutical drugs, a lot of them contain genetically modified, derivatives and all sorts of stuff in them, okay? So you have to look out for those things. And the only ways to really avoid those sort of things are to either make sure that you're getting something organic so that your body can actually utilize the nutrition that's in it, or you have to write to your congressman, write to your senator, write to the lawmakers in your state or in your country or wherever you happen to be and make sure, cause a stink, stir the pot. Make sure that foods that are genetically modified have to be labeled. Get it put on your ballot. There's several ballot measures that come close to doing things like that, but they usually get shot down in advertising by these major companies that have a complete interest in making sure that you only get genetically modified foods. Okay, certain corporations, that's all they do. They say flat out that that's their global agenda, is to make sure that they control all of the seeds in the world and that you have to be eating genetically modified foods. Anyone that's going to threaten you with infertility and cancer and all sorts of problems that no one even knows what they're going to be because they fast track everything through the FDA and you have to take it on, you have to take the burden of that, just don't be lazy. Don't be lazy. Go out and get some real food. Okay? So that's what genetically modified foods are. They affect all sorts of systems in the body. They affect lymph systems. They affect your hormone levels. They affect, the endocrine system. They affect your organs. They affect your muscle tissue. They affect your brain. They affect your heart. They affect all sorts of things. All right? Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do genetically modified foods. They're very, very bad for you. And you can find tons of research on these things online. Most of them are free. Okay? There's a lot of information. There's a doctor, I can't remember his name right now, but he writes a book called Seeds of Deception. And there's Seeds of Deception, and then there's also an associated video series with that. You can probably find that here on YouTube, but if you can, I'm sure if you just search around for a little bit, you'll be able to find it on, just Google it. So that would be an excellent primer on learning what's happening with genetically modified foods out in the world. And the actual documentary Seeds of Deception, the video of it, will include some of the scientists and researchers in Scandinavia that actually started genetically modifying foods because they thought that it was a good thing. They thought it was going to be a really great thing and it was going to give the world a lot more food so much more quickly. And they are the same people, the ones who started working on genetically modified foods and started creating genetically modified organisms. They're the same ones that are leading the charge against them now because they've done years and years of research. About 20 years of research at this point, proving that they are deleterious to your health. So avoid them and avoid any foods that might contain them. and you will be on a much better path, better fast track to taking control of your health. All right, so that's it for this one on genetically modified foods. Tomorrow I'm going to do some ones for the new year, and I hope that they, spark some interest. Maybe you'll like it. Hopefully. We'll see though. All right. Thanks so much. Bye bye.